Chapter 4 Major Disaster. A chemical explosion rocked Eddleton Secondary School. The blast ripped through the science lab, shattering a whole wing of the building. 5 teachers and 47 students were injured. Miraculously, no one was killed. Trig and the other students gathered in the farm field next to school, waiting for family to come and meet them. His guardian, Pentua, had only just arrived on the scene, and she was still pushing her way through the crowd, using her cane to move youngsters aside. Pentua found Trig and hugged him, happy beyond words to see he was unharmed. Police arrived on the scene after the firefighters and medics. They used white tape to cordon off the area of the explosion and mark a landing site in the neighboring field. Pentua tried to pull Trig out of the group to take him home, but that was when the headmaster tapped an officer on the shoulder and pointed at Trig. Both Trig and Pentua groaned as they saw the 3 police officers approach. The Voldemar officials folded their arms and looked down at Trig with judgmental expressions. "Trig Shepminter, we need to talk," said one of the officers. "Did you confront Londa Thoso and tell her to avoid the chemistry classroom?" "Yes," Trig said cautiously. "Where's Londa? Is she all right?" One of the officers narrowed his eyes at Trig. "Miss Thoso is seriously injured, but she is alive," he explained. "She's being stabilized right now." Trig had to grip Pentua's arm to stop himself falling down. The sense of relief made his legs feel like jelly. A loud noise and rushing wind distracted Trig. There was a starship arriving on the scene. The vessel was a corvette, shaped not unlike a barbed arrow. It landed in the field nearby and powered down its engines. Trig spotted a name painted in red on the fuselage. Resonance Cascade. "Team R4 just arrived," said one of the police officers into his radio. "Someone tell them we don't need their help." "Too late for that, sir," another officer replied. "You know how these guys are." Pentua sighed as the ship lowered its boarding ramp. "Well, there goes the last of the colony's money." Trig and Pentua had met Team R4 a couple of times before. Named after Article 4, the government shorthand for military deserter, Team R4 was a group of 7 mercenaries. Over the past year, they had been defending Eddleton from Nagyari raiders, something the Sutherian government was incapable of doing. Trig watched the team descend the ship's ramp, looking around to see if they could help. All 7 mercenaries were Sutherian. Captain Cantor was a Voldemar, like Pentua. He had a messy mop of hair that made him look wild. He kept a pulse rifle slung across his back and walked with a slight limp. Tactical Officer Rulan still wore his Sutharian Navy uniform. His face was obscured by a half-helmet and visor, allowing him to see the world in computer-enhanced augmented reality. Rulan's skin color had a yellow tinge, suggesting he was TS. Selborn was the only woman on the team. Her pale Voldemar skin reflected the sunlight, and she instinctively rolled down her sleeves to avoid being burned. She had 2 magnetic pistols, one strapped to each leg. Bronley, another Voldemar, was the youngest member of the team. He was 6 years older than Trig, at 19. Bronley was tall and thin, and reminded Trig of a tree sapling in a way. Anfel, the medic, was of mixed ethnic ancestry. He had the narrow facial build of a TS, but his skin was Birken brown. Instead of weapons, Anfel carried a heavy backpack laden with military-grade medical supplies. Ponico was the oldest member of the team, older than Captain Cantor even. His white beard complemented his dark Birken skin. Ponico kept a pistol strapped to his leg, but carried no other weapons. Unlike the other 6 mercenaries, Ponico did not search for a way to help people. Instead, he turned his gaze upward, looking into the sky. Ponico glanced around at the sun, the clouds, and the planet high above. There was a deeply worried expression on his face. Glossum was the 7th and final mercenary. He was the only member of Team R4 who did not belong to one of the 3 dominant ethnic groups on Sutheria. Instead, He was part of the Olenbar Kund, a very small race of people created by intermingling with aliens. Glossum's dark blue skin confirmed his ancestry. Team R4 joined the rescue and recovery efforts around the school. Meanwhile, Trig was asked to provide a statement to the police. He tried to explain his premonition to the officer, but kept getting distracted by the sight of Landa's parents, who were trying to push past a police barricade to see their daughter before the ambulance took her away. Pentua lightly tapped Trig on the shoulder, reminding him to stay focused. Once his explanation was complete, Trig fell silent, folding his hands nervously. The officer frowned. "Look, kid, I'm going to level with you," the officer said. "This is different from those incidents in the past. You've gotten into some crazy shit before. The highway incident comes to mind. But back then, you weren't hurting people, and your explanations made sense. This," he tapped his notebook, "this makes no sense. A girl suddenly smelling like sulfur and no one notices. A feeling that something bad was going to happen. Aurora showing up in the middle of the daytime this far south. Kid, do you want to start your story again for me?" Trig felt the bottom go out of his stomach. He had no idea what to say. He had already told the truth. What more did this man want? "Excuse me," said another voice. "Can I barge in for a moment?" Trig, Pentua, and the officer turned to look. Panico, eldest of the R4 mercenaries, was approaching with a quizzical look on his face. "Did you say you saw an aurora?" "An aurora in the daytime?" Panico asked. "This far south?" "Yes, I did," Trig replied. "You believe him?" Pentua asked. "I do," Panico replied, "though explaining why would take some time." The officer suddenly looked very uncomfortable. Panico did not acknowledge him. Instead, Panico turned his gaze to the sky. The old man peered around as though he was looking for something. "Speaking of time," the officer said, "I know we're running out of it. Will your team be able to stay for the whole investigation?" Panico looked at the police officer and shook his head. "I'm afraid not, sir," Panico replied. "Unless your government comes up with more funds, our team will leave at the end of the week. We'll do what we can in the meantime." Then Panico turned back to Trig and Pentua. "If you don't mind, I would like to talk to you about what you saw, young man. What's your name?" Trig felt an electric charge run through his body. He was simultaneously excited and nervous about getting a chance to talk one-on-one with one of the famed R4 mercenaries. "I'm Trig, sir. Trig Shepminter." "Well, Mr. Shepminter, that officer said strange things have happened around you before," Panico said. "I'm interested. Tell me more."